Sir, I'm telling you one last time. Hand over your ID. Now.
No, officer. This is a consensual encounter. I've committed no crime.
You don't get to decide that. You're loitering.
I bought coffee 4 minutes ago. That's not loitering. That's a lie.
Turn around and face the wall.
If you touch me without cause, you're violating the Constitution.
Last warning.
Then make it...
Officer Kyle Vance had been with the Oak Creek Police Department for 4 years when he pulled up to a curb that would effectively end his life as he knew it. He was 28 years old, aggressive, and fueled by a sense of authority that far outstripped his actual experience. On a bright Tuesday morning in a quiet upper-class subdivision, he received a dispatch call about a suspicious individual, possibly stripping parts from a vehicle. The suspicious person was Command Sergeant Major retired Marcus Thorne, a 54-year-old combat infantryman with 3 combat tours, a Silver Star for valor, and knees that still clicked from jumping out of airplanes. Thorne was standing next to his vintage 1978 Ford F-150 holding a tire pressure gauge. What Vance did next, ignoring the calm demeanor of a seasoned veteran mistaking a maintenance tool for a weapon and escalating a non-event into a violent arrest, would cost the city $4.8 million and become a national case study in incompetence. Before we dive into the details of this incident, where are you tuning in from? If you believe that respect should be a two-way street between law enforcement and the community, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like this one act as a mirror to society, and your support helps us keep the reflection clear. The scene was the definition of suburban tranquility. Oak Creek is the kind of neighborhood where the lawns are manicured by professionals, the flags hang at exactly 45 degrees, and the silence is considered a property amenity. It was 10:15 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. The sun was high, casting long shadows across the asphalt. Most residents were at work, leaving the streets to the retirees and the landscaping crews. Marcus Thorne had lived in Oak Creek for 2 years. After 25 years in the United States Army serving in Panama, Iraq, and Afghanistan, he had finally hung up the uniform and purchased his dream home, a brick colonial with a 3-car garage. He spent his mornings maintaining a routine of discipline, a 5-mile walk, coffee on the porch, and tinkering with his pride and joy, a restored '78 Ford truck in midnight blue. Thorne was a man who commanded respect without saying a word. Standing 6'3" with broad shoulders and a posture that was permanently ramrod straight, he looked every bit the infantry leader he had been. He was wearing work boots, canvas cargo pants, and a plain gray t-shirt. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like a man taking care of his property. He had noticed the front left tire looked a little soft. He retrieved his high-grade pressure gauge, a silver pen-shaped tool made of stainless steel, and knelt by the wheel. He was focused, meticulous. He didn't see the blinds twitching across the street. He didn't know that his mere presence, a black man working on a classic car in a predominantly white neighborhood, had triggered a panic response in a neighbor who had too much time and too little sense. Todd Holloway was 35 years old, the self-appointed head of the neighborhood watch, and a man deeply insecure about his place in the world. He had moved into the neighborhood 6 months prior and treated every unfamiliar car as an invasion force. From his living room window, Holloway saw Thorne. He didn't see a neighbor. He didn't see a veteran. He saw a stranger. He saw a black man kneeling by a nice truck with a silver object in his hand. In Holloway's mind, the narrative wrote itself. Car thief, stripping rims, maybe stealing the catalytic converter. He didn't walk outside to ask. He didn't wave. He picked up his phone and dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? Yeah, this is Todd Holloway on Elm Street. There's a guy out here messing with a truck. I think he's stripping it. Do you know who owns the vehicle, sir? I don't know, but he doesn't look like he lives here. He's got some kind of silver weapon or tool in his hand. He's crouching down, looking around suspiciously. Is he threatening anyone? Not yet, but he's got something metal in his hand. It looks like a knife or a pipe. You need to send someone before he steals the car or hurts someone. The dispatcher logged the call. Suspicious male possibly armed with a metal object attempting vehicle theft. This is where the system begins to fail. The information was filtered through Holloway's bias, then coded into police shorthand, turning a man checking his tires into an armed suspect in progress. The call went out to Officer Kyle Vance. Do you think dispatchers should be required to ask more probing questions before classifying a call as a weapon-involved situation? Let us know in the comments below. Officer Kyle Vance was already patrolling 2 streets over. Vance was the son of a former police captain, a legacy hire who wore his badge like a shield against criticism. In his 4 short years on the force, he had accrued 9 complaints. 7 of them were for discourtesy or aggressive language. 2 were for profiling. Every single one had been dismissed or unsubstantiated by a department that preferred to bury problems rather than fix them. Vance was known in the locker room as a cowboy, an officer who craved the adrenaline of the bust more than the service of the community. He felt he had something to prove. When the call came in black male armed vehicle theft in progress, Vance didn't think about investigation. He thought about apprehension. He didn't consider that a thief usually doesn't strip a car at 10 a.m. in broad daylight. He just hit the lights. Vance tore around the corner of Elm Street, his siren chirping once to announce his authority. He slammed the cruiser into park at an angle blocking the driveway, a tactical maneuver designed to intimidate. He exited the vehicle before the engine had even settled, his hand already hovering over his holster. Marcus Thorne heard the siren. He didn't jump. He didn't run. He slowly stood up, the pressure gauge still in his right hand, and turned to face the noise. He saw a young officer, red-faced and charging up the driveway. Thorne's military training kicked in immediately. Assess the threat, maintain composure, de-escalate. He had faced insurgents in Fallujah and Taliban fighters in the Pech Valley. A 28-year-old beat cop did not frighten him, but he respected the danger of a firearm in the hands of an untrained amateur. "Get your hands away from the vehicle. Now drop the weapon." Vance screamed, his voice cracking with adrenaline. Thorne held his ground, his feet shoulder-width apart. He did not drop the gauge immediately because sudden movements often triggered jumpy soldiers and jumpy cops. He moved with deliberate slowness, lowering his hands to waist-level palms out the gauge clearly visible. "Son, I'm checking my tire pressure. Take a breath," Thorne said. His voice was the command voice, a tone developed over 2 decades of leading men into chaos. It was deep, resonant, and calm. It was a voice that usually made privates freeze and listen. But Vance wasn't listening. He saw a large man who wasn't cowering. He saw a silver object that glinted in the sun. "I said drop it. Get on the ground. Do it now, or I will light you up." Vance drew his service weapon, pointing it directly at Thorne's chest. Thorne looked at the barrel of the gun. He calculated the distance. 20 feet. He looked at the officer's finger, which was trembling on the trigger guard. This was the moment where lives end. "Officer," Thorne said, speaking slowly and clearly, "I am Command Sergeant Major Marcus Thorne, United States Army retired. I own this home. I own this truck. This is a tire pressure gauge. I am going to place it on the hood of the truck slowly." "Don't you move. I said get on the ground." Vance advanced, closing the gap. "You're not listening to me." "I am listening perfectly," Thorne replied. "But I have 2 replaced knees and a fused vertebrae from service to this country. I am not getting on the ground for a tire check. I will place my hands on the vehicle." "You're resisting," Vance yelled. "I am complying with common sense. Look at the tool, officer. Look." Vance was too far gone. Tunnel vision had set in. He interpreted Thorne's refusal to lay prone in the dirt as a direct threat to his safety. He holstered his gun and drew his taser, rushing the last 10 feet. Thorne sighed, a mix of disappointment and exhaustion. He placed the gauge on the hood with a metallic clink and turned around, placing his hands behind his back. He knew that any defensive move he made, no matter how justified, would be used to justify lethal force. He chose to survive. Vance reached him and grabbed Thorne's wrist, twisting it violently upward. Thorne flinched not from pain, but from the insult of it. "There is no need for force, officer. I am secured." Shut up. Vance slammed Thorne against the side of the truck. The hot metal of the door pressed against Thorne's cheek. Vance kicked Thorne's legs apart harder than necessary, destabilizing him. You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. For checking a tire, Thorne asked, his voice muffled against the truck. You are making a mistake that you cannot afford. I said shut up. Vance wrestled the handcuffs onto Thorne's wrists. He squeezed them tight, the ratchets clicking down until they bit into the skin. Thorne had scars on his wrists from shrapnel. The metal cuffs pressed directly into sensitive nerve endings. He gritted his teeth. By now, the commotion had drawn an audience. The front door of the house next door opened. Sarah Jenkins, a 60-year-old retired schoolteacher, stepped out. She knew Marcus. She knew he baked pecan pies for the neighborhood block party. Officer, what are you doing? She called out, holding her phone up. That's Mr. Thorne. He lives there. Vance whipped his head around. Back up, ma'am. This is an active crime scene. Crime scene. Sarah scoffed, stepping closer, her camera steady. He was washing his truck. You're arresting a war hero in his own driveway. He has a weapon, Vance shouted, pointing at the hood. That... Sarah zoomed in on the tire gauge. That is a pressure gauge, you idiot. I have one in my glove box. Vance ignored her, but the doubt flickered in his eyes for a microsecond. He looked at the gauge. It was clearly, undeniably, a tire tool. But he was committed now. He had hands on a suspect. He had issued commands. To back down now would be to admit he was wrong, and Kyle Vance did not admit he was wrong. He doubled down. He refused a lawful order. Vance muttered mostly to himself. He yanked Thorne away from the truck. Let's go. Thorne walked with dignity despite the awkward angle of his arms. My wallet is in my back right pocket, Thorne said calmly. Inside is my driver's license, which matches this address, and my retired military ID. Check it. We'll check it at the station, Vance snapped. He opened the back door of the cruiser and shoved Thorne inside. Thorne had to twist his large frame to fit his bad knees, protesting the cramped space. As Vance slammed the door, Thorne looked out the window. He saw Todd Holloway peeking through his blinds across the street. He saw Sarah Jenkins filming, shaking her head in disgust. He saw the American flag on his own porch fluttering in the breeze. He closed his eyes and began to breathe in a 4-count rhythm. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. He wasn't afraid. He was preparing. He was memorizing the badge number on Vance's chest badge, 492. He was noting the time. He was building the file in his head. The drive to the precinct was short and silent. Vance kept glancing in the rearview mirror, perhaps hoping for Thorne to start kicking the doors or screaming profanities, something that would fit the criminal profile Vance had assigned him. But Thorne sat like a stone statue. He stared straight ahead, his face a mask of absolute neutral discipline. It was unnerving. You know, if you just got on the ground, we wouldn't be here, Vance said, trying to justify the silence. Thorne didn't blink. If you had eyes, officer, we wouldn't be here. Vance gripped the steering wheel tighter. You don't tell me how to do my job. Someone needs to, Thorne said, because right now you are driving a lawsuit. They arrived at the precinct. Vance pulled into the sally port, the garage door rattling shut behind them. He pulled Thorne out of the car. Thorne's arms were numb, his shoulders aching with a deep, dull throb that reminded him of cold nights in the Hindu Kush. Vance marched him to the booking desk. The watch commander on duty was Lieutenant Frank Miller. Miller was 55 years old, a 30-year veteran of the force and a man who had actually served in the Marine Corps in the 90s. He was sitting behind the high desk reviewing paperwork, sipping lukewarm coffee. He looked up as Vance dragged Thorne in. Miller's eyes widened. He didn't see a thug. He saw a man who carried himself with the specific, unmistakable bearing of a senior NCO. He saw the haircut high and tight fresh. He saw the boots laced perfectly. He saw the calm. Vance, Miller said, his voice low. "What do we have here?" Suspect was in a driveway on Elm Street stripping a vehicle. Caller stated he had a weapon. Suspect refused to comply with commands to get on the ground. Resisted arrest. Brought him in for processing. Miller looked at Thorne. Thorne looked at Miller. There was a moment of silent communication between the two older men, a recognition of shared values that Vance couldn't possibly understand. "Stripping a vehicle?" Miller asked. "Yes, sir. Had a metal tool." "Sir." Thorne spoke up. His voice filled the room. "Permission to speak." Miller sat up straighter. That wasn't the language of a car thief. "Go ahead." "I am Command Sergeant Major Marcus Thorne, U.S. Army, retired. I reside at 412 Elm Street. I was checking the tire pressure on my 1978 Ford F-150 in my own driveway. The weapon was a tire gauge. Officer Vance refused to verify my residency or my identification." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Miller looked at Vance. "Vance, did you check his ID?" He wouldn't get on the ground, Lou. I had to secure the scene." "Did you check his ID?" Miller repeated, enunciating every word. "I brought him in to identify him here. He was non-compliant." Miller stood up. He walked around the desk. "Sir, where is your wallet?" "Back right pocket," Thorne said. Miller reached into Thorne's pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open. He pulled out the driver's license. 412 Elm Street, Miller read. He looked at Vance. "That's the address of the arrest." Vance swallowed. "Yes, sir." Miller pulled out the second card, a blue Department of Defense ID card with the rank abbreviation CSM. He looked at the third card, a concealed carry permit valid and current. Miller closed the wallet. He took a deep breath, the kind of breath a man takes when he realizes he has to clean up a disaster. He looked at Vance with a gaze that could peel paint off a wall. "You arrested a Command Sergeant Major in his own driveway for checking his tires. He had a metal bar, Lou. It looked like a weapon. A tire gauge looks like a tire gauge. Vance, God help me." Miller turned to Thorne. "Uncuff him, now." Vance fumbled for his keys, but he resisted. "Unlock the damn cuffs, Vance!" Miller roared. The sound echoed off the cinderblock walls. Vance unlocked the cuffs. Thorne brought his hands forward, rubbing his wrists. The deep red indentations were clearly visible against his dark skin. He rotated his shoulder, a sharp pop audible in the quiet room. "Sergeant Major," Miller said, his tone shifting to one of profound respect and apology. "I need to apologize on behalf of this department. This is a failure." Thorne looked at Miller, then at Vance. "Lieutenant, your officer pointed a loaded weapon at my chest because I was maintaining my vehicle. He refused to look at the evidence in front of him. He refused to de-escalate. He has no business wearing that badge. I was following training," Vance protested, his face red. "He fit the description." "The description." Thorne turned on him, his eyes blazing. "The description was a black man in a driveway. That is not a crime. That is existence. And because of your inability to distinguish between a citizen and a threat, you have violated my civil rights, assaulted a disabled veteran, and disgraced your uniform." Miller held up a hand. "Vance, badge and gun, on the desk." "What? You can't be serious. For a mistake." "It's not a mistake when you ignore the facts to fit your bias. It's negligence. Put them on the desk. You are on administrative leave pending an investigation." Vance stood there stunned. He looked around the room looking for support from the other officers. Everyone was looking at the floor or busy with paperwork. No one was going to step in front of this train. Vance slowly unbuckled his gun belt. He placed his badge on the counter. The metal clatter sounded like a gavel coming down. "Do you think officers who make false arrests should be personally liable for the damages? Share your thoughts below." The aftermath was swift and brutal. but not for Marcus Thorne. The video from Sarah Jenkins's phone hit the internet 3 hours later. It was titled, "Hero Arrested in Driveway for Being Black." It had 2 million views by dinner time. The visual of a 28-year-old officer screaming at a calm, older black man standing next to a pristine vintage truck was undeniable. The contrast between Vance's hysteria and Thorne's discipline was a Rorschach test for America, and America was angry. The local news camped out on Elm Street. Todd Holloway, the neighbor who made the call, was identified by internet sleuths within a day. His employer, a mid-sized logistics firm, was bombarded with calls. Holloway tried to claim he was just being a concerned citizen. But the 911 recording, which was released after a Freedom of Information Act request, revealed the truth. He hadn't reported a crime. He had reported a feeling. He had weaponized the police against his neighbor. Holloway was fired 2 weeks later for violating company values regarding community conduct. He put his house on the market a month after that. The neighbors stopped waving. Officer Kyle Vance was not just fired. Because of the clear video evidence showing him escalating a non-threat and lying about the weapon, the district attorney, under immense public pressure, declined to shield him. Vance was charged with assault and official oppression. He pleaded down to a misdemeanor to avoid jail time, but he was decertified. He would never work in law enforcement again. Marcus Thorne filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the city of Oak Creek and the police department. His lawyer, a shark from Chicago who specialized in excessive force cases, laid it out simply. Thorne was unlawfully detained, assaulted, and profiled. The city's attorneys watched the video once and advised the mayor to settle. There was no defense. You cannot defend the indefensible. The settlement was reached in 8 months, $4.8 million. The city also agreed to a consent decree requiring mandatory de-escalation training for all officers, specifically regarding interaction with minority residents. But for Thorne, it wasn't about the money. He donated a significant portion of the settlement to a legal defense fund for veterans who had been wrongfully arrested. He kept his house. He kept his truck. 6 months after the incident, on a warm spring morning, Marcus Thorne was in his driveway. He was washing the '78 Ford. The water beaded up on the midnight blue paint. A police cruiser rolled slowly down the street. It was a new officer, a young woman. She slowed down as she passed the house. She didn't hit the siren. She didn't stop. She rolled down her window and nodded. "Morning, Sergeant Major," she said. Thorne looked up the hose in his hand. He nodded back. "Officer." She drove on. It was a small gesture, but it mattered. It was an acknowledgement that the power dynamic had shifted, if only slightly. But the scar remained. Thorne knew that every time he stepped out of his front door, he wasn't just a neighbor or a veteran to some people. He was a suspect waiting for a narrative. This story ended with a settlement. But how many end in a funeral? How many Marcus Thornes are there who don't have the rank, the discipline, or the witnesses to survive the encounter? Kyle Vance saw a threat because he was trained to see threats in black faces. Todd Holloway saw a criminal because he couldn't imagine a black man owning the best truck on the block. Until we dismantle those assumptions, the settlements will keep getting paid, and the trauma will keep compounding. Justice was served in Oak Creek, but peace. Peace is a tire gauge that doesn't look like a weapon. Peace is a neighbor who waves instead of calling 911. Peace is the freedom to exist in your own driveway without fear. What would you have done if you were in Marcus Thorne's position? Would you have been able to stay calm, and what should happen to neighbors like Todd who weaponize the police? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that bring the truth to light.